Tasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
So, today's Bhagavad Gita is chapter 7, verse 20. Kamistasya rita jnana prapadhyante nyadevatah tam tam nyamam asthaya prakritya niyatasvayam. The translation is, enslaved by their inherent nature and deprived of insight by various desires, the worldly minded turn to other demigods, observing various disciplines. It's a very beautiful verse. And comes right after, me and Myron have a joke. It's not a joke, but when it comes to SPN and we see each other in the bungalow, we see each other, we just look at each other and we say, Vasudeva Sarvam. Yeah, everything is Vasudeva. It's the verse he did yesterday. And it's beautiful how in verse 19, I just read it again, so we have the context. Yesterday what Myron gave a kata about was, at the end of many births, the one who has true knowledge surrenders to me, realizing that Krishna is everything, Vasudeva Sarva. Such a person is very rare. So in verse 19 talks about somebody who knows that Vasudeva is everything, that Krishna is everything, and immediately after he says, enslaved by their inherent nature and deprived of insight by various desires, the worldly minded people turn to other demigods, observing various disciplines. So on one side it talks about the jnani who understands that Krishna is everything, and immediately after it talks about worldly people, worldly minded people that still do their sadhana, they still do practices, and they still practice what we would call spirituality. But they do it to gain something. So many times we talk about how Krishna somehow is criticizing the first portion of the Vedas. When he talks about the worldly minded people, he's talking about people who use rituals, who use their disciplines to gain something. And the question is, or at least the question I ask myself is, what am I doing? Am I amongst the jnanis who sees Vasudeva in everything? Or am I amongst the people that Krishna is talking about in this verse? When he talks about the worldly minded people. Am I on the path to gain something because I want something? Or I just clearly see that Krishna is everything and I surrender to him? At least my answer is that I'm on the path to become like the jnani, but I'm not there. And I already said twice in the other talks that I gave. And I really love this verse when Prahlad says to Narasimha, he says, I'm your unmotivated servant. And again, it goes down to this, because when you're motivated by something, you fall in the category that Krishna is talking about of worldly minded people who want to gain something. And to make it clear, there is a member of my family, for example, that on the desktop of his computer has a Mercedes MLK, like the SUV. And I said, why do you have this? By the way, yeah. Okay, he's my dad, I have to say. Nice term. Okay, so it's my dad, and he has the Mercedes, and I'm like, oh, that's a nice car, but I mean, you have one son and a daughter, and I don't know, like you have, I think, nicer things to put on your desktop. No? I don't know what you have on your desktop, but I have Guruji's picture. And I have one desktop, and on the other one I have Kali from Navarati, very beautiful picture. So, and this shows where my focus is, right? My focus is on the Lord and is on a manifestation of the Divine Mother. But if you go to my dad's computer, you will just open it and you see a Mercedes, and you're like, why is there? And he says, well, because I want a Mercedes. It's very easy, actually. And I say, oh, and what's your plan to have it? And he says, oh, I wake up every morning, I do my he does his own sadhana, so he's doing his practices, he's doing his rituals, and then he prays to this absolute, to this kind of consciousness, in a very Advaitic concept, where you pray to like this genie of the universe. And you ask to the genie, you pray to the genie, you somehow surrender to this genie so that the genie will give you back money so that you can buy the Mercedes. Now, I don't think it sounds so weird. We all come from the world, and I think it's a very common practice. Many people do this. And to stop talking about my dad, because poor one is a live stream, I don't want to destroy his reputation, even though I did it many times already. But when I was younger, I always had this fixation of like spiritual powers, like siddhis. No? Sometimes when I was very young, I was putting my hands around a glass of water and I wanted to make bubbles. I was convinced I could do it. I always failed miserably, but I was convinced somewhere inside of me that I could do it. And when I grew older, I learned there was like a literature on like siddhis and this kind of activities and spiritual powers. And I found a shaman author, and I started to read the books. So I started to practice what you would call normally in the world, like some esoteric rituals or esoteric practices that you would put, if you go in the library, probably you put them under spirituality somehow. Like esoteric spiritual books or stuff. And the reason why I wanted that was not because I wanted to surrender everything to God and act according to His will, but I wanted power. How many of you want power? That's the tough question, John. Courageous. Because somehow when you're in the worldly minded category that Krishna is talking about, you want power because you're talking about yourself. The worldly minded people are people or persons that are fixated upon their own interest and their own mind and their own ego. Their own individuality matters more than the others. So if something very bad happens right now to a Radhaka, I don't know what can be, but whatever it might be, and then something way less important happens to me, I tell you from experience that somehow I will put myself first than a Radhaka. Because there is this attitude of putting our own problems first, and we always suffer more than the others. I don't know, many of you had this challenge. I had a kind of a challenging life when my life was somehow challenging until I met Guruji. And when I was meeting people who had also a challenging life, I was making a challenge with them who was suffering more. It was like, oh, you know, my dad left. I said, oh, mine too. How old were you? Because I was 9 months. Were you also? I said, no, I was 2 years. I said, oh, shame on you, I'm sorry. I win. So even in these things, you try to be the best. Because what matters, again, for a worldly minded person, it's yourself. It's all about you. It's not about the others. It's not about God. And many times in a spiritual environment, you have people that, deluded by these principles and all these sacred texts, they would say that they act according to what God will, what God wants, and what they think God wants. And they're very sure of it, and they somehow delude themselves, forgetting that they're acting according to what they want. And it's always about power. Because as Prahlad said, you're unmotivated servant. An unmotivated servant understands the nature of who he is, his true nature. And if you go in the relationship of the jiva, of the soul with the Lord, with Narayana, you see that Narayana is the controller and the jiva is controlled. And when you want power, you think you can be the controller, when by nature you're not. But the amazingness of life is that God gives us this ability and possibility to think and play this game where we might be the controllers, we might be in power, we might be the bosses. And how can we convert all this mentality and structure with the relationship we have with Guruji? And you see, Guruji can, as Prita was saying today, he might shout at you, he might behave in many ways. He might give you a lot of love, he might shout at you a lot. There is something that is never changing, that he sees Vasudeva Sarvam. He is the Vasudeva Sarvam, like he's the embodiment of this. Vasudeva is everything. And everything that he's doing it according to this law of nature, that he's the controller and we are the controlled. And he's guiding us through the path so that we can reach the understanding of it. That we can realize this, that he's the controller, we're just controlled. But when we are with him, many times he says things, or we go in this condition where we think we're right. You always agree with what Guruji says?
No.
No? Me neither. I don't always agree with him, but I know that I have to listen to him. Even if what he says is completely irrational. Because again, we're worldly minded people, or at least I say for myself. I might put myself in this category. I'm a worldly minded person, and I'm thinking, and as I'm not an unmotivated servant, with my motivations, I want something. And specifically in the relationship with him, I want recognition. And I think most of us want, no? You give him a gift, you don't expect him to take the gift and throw it away. He might do it, but that's not what you expect. Yeah, you travel hours, there's a huge mess in the world, but you anyway travel, you come here, you want to see him, and he doesn't even look at you. You want him to look at you. Why? Because you want recognition. So you're always putting yourself first because you want something. That's why I love that verse from Prahlad. Unmotivated servant. Prahlad would do whatever he did in his Leela because he just loved God. And he saw God in everything, and he had zero problems to be actually seen or not, because he understood his nature, and he understood that Vasudeva Sarvam, God is everything, Vasudeva is everything. And so, with Guruji we want this recognition because we fail to understand that we should not want something from him, but we should just focus on giving. And that's a big difference when, as I said at the beginning, we say that Krishna is criticizing people who practice karma yoga. It's not because he doesn't like karma yoga, because he doesn't like the demigods, or because he doesn't like the practice. Karma Kanda, sorry, I said karma yoga. When he say he doesn't like the karma kanda portion of the Vedas, we're not saying that he doesn't like it because of the practices of the people that are doing it, but because the mentality of some of the people who are doing it is just to gain something. For instance, you do a yagna to receive more money, so you do it just for abundance. Or you need the rain to come down because of you need to survive somehow, so that's why you're doing a yagna. And you see, that's what Krishna is criticizing in this moment. That's what Krishna is saying, that's not the right mentality, because you're doing something to receive something else. So the relationship of the controller and controlled and the unmotivated servant towards the master is not there. And I love this kind of verses because every time they put me in a situation where I have to analyze myself and check, am I doing the worldly minded person, or I'm following verse 19 of yesterday when I see God in everything and I'm not complaining, I'm not asking for something, I'm not demanding to receive something, but I just accept what happens and I see God in everything and in all the situations. That's why these verses are so beautiful. And mainly, what I want to conclude with is, a nice thing is that I'm not a worldly minded person forever. Or all the day. You know, you have to check yourself and see, okay, right now I'm thinking something. Right now I am somewhere, but that's not the totality of who I am. And if we just trust Guruji, we might not yet know that God is everything, or we might know it because we read it in chapter 7, verse 19. And we're still focused on gaining something. But even if we don't know it, we know that that's the final place where Guruji wants to lead us. He's going to bring us there. And the only thing we have to do is to have trust and have faith in Him. But again, He will do it by His own will and according to His own instruments and ways. So when Prahlad says, I'm unmotivated, he says, I'm not complaining in the way you do it. Because remember, Prahlad was there seeing his father being killed. All the army was killed. Narasimha was destroying everything. But he didn't really care. Why? Because he was not focused on the way Narasimha was doing things, or he was liberating him, or he was showing him things. But what Prahlad was focused on was just on God. And that's what Guruji is teaching us. And that's what I hope we can do every day more, until we realize that God is everything. Jai Gurudev.